To understand why Russia and Ukraine are still fighting today, on July 6, 2025, we must first look at their shared and complicated history. For many centuries, these two nations were deeply connected, almost like brothers. A very long time ago, a powerful state called Kievan Rus was the cradle of both Russian and Ukrainian cultures. This shared origin is something that both countries look back on, but they see it in very different ways. Russia often views Ukraine as a younger brother, a natural part of its own world and sphere of influence. This is a very important point to remember. It is a core part of the problem. However, Ukraine sees itself differently. It sees itself as a separate and independent nation with its own unique language, its own distinct culture, and its own sovereign destiny. Throughout history, especially in the 20th century under the Soviet Union, Ukraine fought hard to maintain this identity. Russia, as the dominant power in the Soviet Union, often suppressed these efforts. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine finally declared its full independence. This was a moment of great pride for the Ukrainian people, but for some in Moscow, it was seen as a major historical mistake that needed to be corrected. The tension between these two viewpoints grew over the following decades. Ukraine started looking towards the West, wanting to build closer relationships with Europe and the United States. It wanted to join Western groups like the European Union and, most importantly, the military alliance called NATO. Russia saw this as a direct threat to its security. Imagine your next-door neighbor, who you have always known, suddenly wanting to join a club that you see as your rival. This is how Russia viewed Ukraine's desire to join NATO. Russia felt that the West was moving too close to its borders. This feeling in Moscow became stronger and stronger. In 2014, these tensions exploded. A pro-Russian president in Ukraine was removed from power by popular protests. In response, Russia acted decisively. It annexed a part of Ukraine called Crimea, a peninsula in the Black Sea with a large Russian-speaking population. At the same time, Russia supported separatist fighters in the eastern part of Ukraine, in a region called Donbas. This started a smaller war that simmered for 8 long years, setting the stage for the massive invasion that was to come. The world watched, but the conflict was just beginning. On February 24, 2022, the simmering conflict erupted into a full-scale war. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation, launching a massive invasion of Ukraine from the north, east, and south. The world was shocked by the scale of the attack. Russia's stated goals were clear and direct. They wanted to stop Ukraine from ever joining NATO, a goal they called demilitarization. They also wanted to remove Ukraine's government, which they falsely called a Nazi regime, a process they termed denazification. Essentially, Russia wanted to pull Ukraine back into its orbit and ensure it could never align with the West. Ukraine, under the leadership of President Volodymyr Zelensky, refused to surrender. The Ukrainian people and their army fought back with incredible determination. They defended their capital city, Kyiv, and forced the Russian army to retreat from the northern regions. Ukraine's position was simple and unwavering. It was fighting for its very existence as a sovereign nation. It wants all Russian soldiers to leave its territory, including Crimea and the Donbas region. For Ukraine, this is not just a war over land. It is a fight for the freedom to choose its own future, its own allies, and its own way of life. The world's response was swift and largely united against Russia's aggression. Countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and members of the European Union immediately imposed heavy economic sanctions on Russia. These sanctions were designed to cripple Russia's economy and its ability to fund the war. Think of it like cutting off the money supply to your opponent. These nations also started sending huge amounts of military aid to Ukraine. They provided everything from rifles and ammunition to advanced tanks, artillery systems, and critical air defense missiles to help Ukraine protect its skies. This international support became a lifeline for Ukraine. It allowed the much smaller Ukrainian army to stand against the might of the Russian military. The support was not just from governments. Ordinary people around the world protested the invasion and donated money to help Ukrainian civilians. However, not all countries joined the sanctions. Nations like China and India took a more neutral stance, continuing to trade with Russia. This division showed that the world was not completely united, and this has had a significant impact on how long the war has lasted. The battle lines were drawn, not just on the ground but globally. Now, in the middle of 2025, the war has become a brutal and grinding conflict. It is a war of attrition, where both sides try to wear the other down slowly. The front lines, which stretch for over 1,000 kilometers, move very slowly. Russia currently controls about 19% of Ukraine's territory. This is a huge area, roughly the size of the US state of Ohio. The fighting is most intense in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, and also in the south. In recent months, Russian forces have been making slow but steady gains, capturing small villages and towns week by week, putting immense pressure on Ukrainian defenders. The nature of the fighting has changed. In 2022, it was a war of rapid movement. Now, it is a war of trenches, artillery, and drones. Drones have become the eyes in the sky for both armies, used for spotting enemy positions and for direct attacks. Every day, thousands of artillery shells are fired, turning the landscape into a cratered wasteland. Recently, in June 2025, Russia launched a massive air attack involving over 470 drones and 60 missiles in a single night. Ukraine, in turn, has used long-range missiles provided by its allies to strike important Russian targets deep behind enemy lines, including military headquarters and fuel depots. International support for Ukraine remains crucial, but it has faced challenges. The United States, Ukraine's biggest military backer, recently paused some shipments of key weapons like Patriot air defense missiles. The new Trump administration in the US has expressed a desire to end the war, but talks with both Russian and Ukrainian leaders in early July 2025 have not led to a breakthrough. President Trump has admitted he is unsure if he can stop the fighting. While the US pause is a major concern for Ukraine, other allies like Germany, the UK, and Sweden are stepping up their support, sending more drones and money. Meanwhile, Ukraine is working hard to build its own weapons industry. It has signed deals to produce hundreds of thousands of drones inside the country. This is very important because it will make Ukraine less dependent on foreign aid in the long run. However, Russia continues to attack Ukrainian cities and power plants with missiles and drones, trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people. In the first half of 2025, these attacks destroyed a huge portion of Ukraine's ability to generate electricity, causing blackouts and hardship for millions of civilians far from the front lines. The war is being fought everywhere. The human cost of this war is staggering and almost impossible to fully comprehend. After more than 3 years of fighting, the numbers are heartbreaking. It is estimated that over 790,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded. For Ukraine, the military casualties are also devastating, estimated to be around 400,000 killed or injured. These are not just numbers, they are fathers, sons, and brothers. Behind every single statistic is a family that has been torn apart by grief and loss. The impact on a generation of young men in both countries will be felt for decades to come. The suffering of civilians is equally immense. Over 13,000 Ukrainian civilians have been confirmed killed, though the real number is likely much higher. Cities like Mariupol and Bakhmut have been completely destroyed, reduced to rubble. The war has also created a massive refugee crisis. About 9.4 million Ukrainians have been forced to leave their homes. That is more than 20% of the country's entire pre-war population. Over 5.6 million of these people are now living as refugees in other countries, scattered across Europe and the world, uncertain when or if they will ever be able to return home. So is there any hope for peace? Right now, the path to peace looks very difficult. Russia continues to insist on its original goals, that Ukraine must not join NATO and must accept the loss of its territory. Ukraine, on the other hand, says it will not stop fighting until all Russian troops are gone from its land. For any real peace talks to begin, one or both sides would need to change these core positions, and there is no sign of that happening. Recent phone calls between the US president and the leaders of Russia and Ukraine have shown that they are still very far apart. Looking ahead, the future is highly uncertain. The war could continue as a long, grinding conflict for many more months or even years, with both sides suffering heavy losses for small gains, or a change in the level of international support, especially from the United States, could dramatically shift the balance of power on the battlefield. Public opinion is also shifting. Polls show that a growing number of people in both Russia and Ukraine now support peace negotiations. Ultimately, a lasting peace will only be possible when both nations are willing to silence